The ultimate starting pitcher guide. That's right. We're talking about the top 30, the big pitchers, the aces, the core of everybody that you're going with. Sleepers, maybe some busts, some must-haves. We are covering it all right here on Fantasy Pros. I'm Chris Welsh, and joining me, I could think of no other wonderful, great person than Mr. Stuff Plus himself, and the only human being that I can say I drank a beer out of a boot with. He is Eno Sarris from The Athletic. What's up, Eno? Last time we were together, I think. Well, we saw a little bit recently, but our last big encounter, we spent the day together and we were drinking out of Does Boots.
That's right. In Scottsdale, I think. So, yeah, that was fun.
That was fun.
And I don't know if I've given you one of my cans with my face on it, so you could almost say that you drank a beer out of a can with my face on. I don't know if I gave you one of my Stuff Plus
I need one of those. I absolutely need one of those. But we did learn that I didn't do the proper, what was it? The
turn.
The turn. I didn't do the turn, and I just got annihilated with it, and you taught me how to do it. But today we're not necessarily teaching everybody about how to drink beer out of a boot. We're talking about the starting pitchers. Eno's here, and Eno's going to give us all of his insight as we're going to be going through Fantasy Pros top 30 on the ECR expert consensus ranks. These are the top 30 pitchers that everybody has come up with. So there's going to be a kind of few that are going to drop in and out here. But we've got a part 2 of this episode, which I'll tell you at the end on how that's going to go. So, Mr. Eno Sarris, let's jump right into it. Let's talk about the top 10 on ECR, and maybe a surprise when you get the experts together. Tarik Skubal comes in at number 1. Obviously, him and Paul Skenes kind of jump back and forth. I believe that's probably 1 and 2 for everybody. But our ECR on the big board, it looks like, as you can see, Tarik Skubal, Paul Skenes at 2, Zach Wheeler at 3, Logan Gilbert number 4. We've got Ohtani is in there. That's a little bit of a Ohtani issue in the ranks in general. Corbin Burnes, Chris Sale, Garrett Crochet, Cole Reagans, and Dylan Cease. So let's talk about the very tippy top here. Tarik Skubal or Paul Skenes. And when you answer that question, the thing I think that's surrounded most with it, Eno, is whoever that person is it worth a top 15 pick in any, if it's head-to-head, if it's roto, maybe you caveat it to 12 or 15-man. Which pitcher, and is it worth a first-round pick?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question because I think it becomes philosophical. But one of the reasons that we don't, like if you put Tarik Skubal's numbers in and you say, oh, he's definitely giving me those numbers, and you spit it out into like a ranking or an auction calculator, he should be like one of the first 2 players picked in the draft. And we never do things like this. We never take pitchers in the top 3. Why don't we? Because pitchers get hurt more often, stay hurt longer. And so it becomes a little bit more of a crapshoot. And so for me, my ace, I want them to be the healthy guy. I want to be more likely to get the innings. So I care about getting 170 healthy innings out of my ace. And so therefore I will pick Paul Skenes because I think that people are forgetting some of Tarik Skubal's injury history. He's had 2 major arm injuries and surgery in the last 2 years. Last year was a great year and gave us the promise of what he can do if he stays in one place, but there's something about his crossbody mechanics and just something about his history in particular. And I'm picking the Nets. Obviously, I take Skubal second, but I want a horse with my number 1. And if I'm going to pick a pitcher in the first round, it's got to be a kid who has got a fresh arm and has shown us he can do innings in the past.
And I think the team outwardly said like they're pushing for the 30 or 30 plus starts this year. I think the 170, and that's the funny thing about nowadays. It's like it used to be. It's like Workhorse was 200. Workhorse now is about 170, 175. That's in that proper range. And Paul Skenes definitely kind of obviously fits that mold. And if Skubal stays healthy, he goes in there as well. We talked about this on an episode we just did a little bit ago. Joe Pisapia and I talking about the top 50, and it was kind of going through strategy of where to pick and how you're picking, and we had a big conversation around those starting pitchers. Joe very adamantly couldn't see a scenario where he was taking a pitcher in the first round. I definitely think on the wheel, I think 12 team it kind of opens up to like, hey, you do get an advantage and there's a bigger player pool to kind of go from, since there's only 12 teams, that you could take Paul Skenes on the wheel and you could make do. 15 team, it kind of goes both ways. You could say, wow, there's a lot less to deal with, but if Paul Skenes did fall to 15, you do have that advantage. What do you think the odds are for you that you would, I'll just say anywhere from pick 12 to 15, that you would take a Paul Skenes in one of your drafts?
It goes up if he drops past 12. If he drops past 12, then I feel like I can get a hitter that's sort of like, maybe I could get a hitter that actually should be, quote unquote, in the first round, you know? Especially if I'm taking like 15, 16, it's like, well, I'm taking a hitter that's like, you know, just pretend I took it the other way, you know? But like, if it's that close, you know, I do think that there's like sort of a top 15 hitters or so. If you can get one of the top 15 hitters along with Paul Skenes, I think you're okay.
When you're looking at this from a tier perspective, I think it's probably fair to say Skubal and Skenes are in a tier. How big, looking at this top 10, we're going to talk about another guy here in a second, but what do you think this next tier looks like? Your ranks may differ, of course. Zach Wheeler comes in at 3. Again, Gilbert, you got Burnes, Sale, Crochet, Reagan, Cease. I'm going to kind of nix Ohtani even though he's on there. Like, how big of the tier 2 and how many pitchers are in that group for you?
Well, you'll find that rankers, I think, have a large spread in, you know, how injury averse they are and how much they care about that. And I think I'm maybe slightly on the conservative side. So I have Skenes, Skubal, Wheeler, Burnes, Gilbert. That's my top 5. Okay. And partially you can hear from that, I hear a lot of volume. I hear a lot of, you know, good, healthy outcomes in the last few years and really good pitchers. But there would be a tier after that to the Crochet, Sale, Reagan's crew. Yeah. Because that's where, I mean, obviously Crochet's had massive injury problems. And then Sale last year was healthy, but he had years where he almost missed the whole year. So, you know, that's where I kind of, I see a top 4 or 5 that I feel much better about the likelihood. And another thing that you can do, if you take a guy that you think you feel good about health-wise, there are always going to be health risks at every part of the draft. You know, like there's at every part of the draft, at every level for pitching, there's going to be health risks. If you take a health risk first, then you don't want to take a health risk for a while. But the longer you feel like you can take good, like what you think are healthier arms and guys are going to give you more bulk, the more that opens you up to end with maybe a little bit of YOLO at the end where you're just like, hey, you know, I was healthy up top. Now I can take all the Brian Woos of the world, you know, let's just lump them on, you know. So that's another thing that I want to do is just get somebody that can set me up to take more risks later.
We were going to talk about him, but just as a real quick, has Gilbert really solidified himself in that top tier? I remember talking to you about him last year, and there was maybe some concerns about how the fastball plays to how dominant that splitter would be, and he's just a monster. And if anything, like you were talking about, and you said your top 5, it's just a bunch of guys that just stack innings and you can really count on. And I kind of thought Kirby was going to take the step above Gilbert. That did not happen. Just a quick thought on Logan Gilbert before we jump to the next guy on this list.
Yeah, he kind of came back with one of the better curveballs he's had, and the splitter ended up being a real weapon for him. And one thing I like about Gilbert is he's already in spring, you know, talking about having a new pitch. And this is something that all the Mariners are like. They really feed off each other, and they have a real culture of collaboration and like innovation among them. So Kirby's coming into town with a cutter. Logan Gilbert's trying to throw a sinker. Bryce Miller, I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be, I think it's a cutter.
He said it's, I can actually tell you, I talked to Bryce. Every year I get to Bryce, and he told me, because remember, you and I talked about this when he's like, I'm throwing 2 sliders now. And that was when it went sweeper and gyro. And then this year, he told me, he said, it's a cutter. And then I was like, how many variations of the slider are you going to throw? And he's like, exactly. I'm going to try as many as I can. But he told me face to face it was a cutter. So we can add that.
Yeah, so I really like that. I think that they kind of get the most out of each other. And the one last thing I like about Gilbert, this has nothing to do with, you know, normal stuff that I talk about, but I think he's gone from being, in his first year, he had these like slumped shoulders, and he was so sad, and I almost wanted to hug him through the TV because he was doing so poorly. Now he's turned into a complete bulldog. Like if you see him on the field, he's almost like Ryan-esque, where he's got that like he's like almost shouting like Clemens. You know, he's really intense, and there's something I like about that. I mean, I feel like he's going to dominate the best he can with what he's got, and you know, those are from the intellectual side and also from this like emotional sort of yelling.
I like that a lot. I actually like that a lot. The other guy I wanted to talk, well, there's two more guys we're going to talk about in this tier. Corbin Burnes, because Corbin Burnes is really fascinating because, you know, he started off the season in this really Cy Young type of way. Things tapered back. The total ended up being a just sub 3 ERA, around 2.9. I think it was 2.94 or 2.92. One of the better he's had in the last couple of years. But he had a full run extra on his ERA in the second half. He had like a 2.4 or 2.6 ERA in the first half. It was a 3.6 in the second half. So he really added on the second half. Things kind of tapered down. Yet you saw velo increases on that cutter. I kind of thought some of, you know, like the second half didn't tell the full story of him. Now he goes to Arizona. It is maybe more of a hitter-friendly environment, and obviously you're in a division with the Dodgers, but you've got a lot of speed, you got a lot of run support, you got a lot of defense out there. What's your take on Corbin Burnes? Because I think if most people would have been asked, like, let's say 5 months ago, hey, is Corbin Burnes a top 5 fantasy pitcher in 2025? People like, no, like, absolutely not. I just don't feel like that sentiment was out there, but I'm kind of with you on this. You put him as a top 5. He's 6 on this list. Without Ohtani, he would be 5. Your thoughts on Corbin Burnes in Arizona?
Yeah, you know, the cutter did regain its shape. It's lost some shape early last season, some drop, and it regained its shape in the second half. He did have some velo changes in the second half, and then he also started throwing a sweeper late in the season. And again, this is slightly not all numbers. It's just I with that sweeper and with the kind of tinkering, I think he's really smart about his pitches, and I think to some extent the strikeout rate drop was on purpose. A little bit of I throw a great cutter, and cutters, you know, diminish balls in play and like you know get soft contact, and so you know I'm going to stay healthy and get through these innings faster, and you know get my team a W rather than focus on striking everybody out. And you know that has ups and downs for fantasy. For fantasy, you say, "Oh, what's his strikeout rate going to be?" But I will point out that once the shape came back on the cutter and the sweeper came out in that last month, he regained his strikeout rate. It's more like 24%. And if you give him that 24%, it's not quite back to his 35% of like peak him, but it is a little bit back to 2023 when he had a 26% strikeout rate. So I think he's going to get a bounce back in the strikeout rate department. I think he's going to throw some of those sweepers, and he's going to get that cutter shape back like he had late last year. And I think it'll be mostly vintage.
The final guy in this range, I am quite a bit higher from a overall SP rank, and I think you threw him in there as well. I'm higher than ECR. It is Garrett Crochet of this final top 10 that we're going to talk about. I think there's maybe some mixed feelings in general just because of, you know, he was a White Sox last year. Ballpark factors are better for hitters, better against him in Boston. That's quite a bit of a change. But you're also talking about a guy with massive run support, had a 3.58 ERA with a 2.85 expected ERA. Numbers were under, big strikeout, 35K percentage. It's a monster arsenal for a guy that's going to have massive run support. Everything is better, clearly. The only thing I think you would really put in question is, you know, what is hitting in that division and maybe in Boston's ballpark? What could that do to him? But you take those strikeouts, I want to say maybe it's ATC has him projected as the number 1 in strikeouts in the league. And if you're giving me a low 3 ERA in Boston with league leading strikeouts, I think he has the workings of being a top 3 fantasy pitcher in baseball. So I've got him inside of my top 5. He's outside of it here. We're going to obviously bring him up a little bit later too when we get into our sleepers and must-haves and whatnot. But give me your thoughts on Garrett Crochet.
I mean, guys projected to have basically a 3 ERA or less in my sort of top of my rankings include, you know, Jacob deGrom, Spencer Strider, Tyler Glasnow, and then Skubal and Skenes, and Garrett Crochet. And you can tell from that list that there's a lot of injury risk in being that good of a pitcher. But last year, the White Sox got Crochet to 146 innings, even though it was terrible at the end for anybody that was trying to use him because they were throwing him out there for like 3 innings at a pop, and it was terrible. But to get him to 146 means that he can do 150, 160 this year without having to be shut down or whatever. Maybe, some guys I think can be kept healthier on a 5-day rotation than they can in kind of a bullpen situation. That was one of the problems with Crochet, was all these injuries. But what if we just really keep you on the schedule and there's no aberration from it? There's no getting you warm and sitting you down and getting you warm or whatever it is. Maybe that's the best way to keep Crochet healthy. In terms from a pitching standpoint, he starts with a dominant fastball, one of the best fastballs in the league. Added a good cutter, can bring the sweeper back that he threw last year, and then he started throwing a sinker. So he's not as much of a 2-pitch pitcher as he was, for most of last season.
And he is very, very exciting. Would you take Crochet or Cole Ragans? Did you say you had Crochet at top 5? Who would you?
I have a Crochet, Sale, Ragans in that order.
Let's say there's a round of value difference. Let's say it's 4th round for Crochet and 5th round for Ragans, or it might be more appropriate. Let's do this. Let's press you harder. 3rd round for Crochet or 4th round for Ragans. What side would you go on?
I think they have somewhat equal injury risk, actually, because Crochet, Ragans lost more velo on his fastball over the course of last season than any other starting pitcher. So I am going to take Crochet even with the round.
Okay, love it. There you go. There's a big plug in there. A couple guys in there, maybe some future Hall of Famers. One, definitely Chris Sale, a Hall of Famer. Though he is not a starting pitcher, we are giving away some Hall of Fame. This week, we are giving away a Billy Wagner signed baseball, courtesy of our friends over at pristineauction.com. And all you got to do to enter is subscribe to the Fantasy Pros MLB YouTube channel right now. Drop a comment below on the video. You can talk and tell us who your favorite pitchers are in these tiers and pitchers in the top 30 that you're targeting. And that's it. We'll be announcing one lucky winner right here on the channel, so make sure you turn on notifications so you will know when new videos are up, and you can claim the prize of that autograph Billy Wagner baseball. As mentioned on a previous episode, not a ball that I have behind me, so you will be one step ahead of me, and there's a lot of autographed baseballs behind there. There's a Chris Sale.
I voted for him. He got my Hall of Fame vote.
Good. Oh, man, we could have a whole nother episode on that. You know that. All right, let's go to our next tier. We're going to go 11 through 20 looking on the big board. Coming in at 11 on the ECR is Blake Snell. We've got George Kirby, Gerrit Cole, Michael King at 14, Yoshinobu Yamamoto at 15, Jacob deGrom, Framber Valdez, Pablo Lopez, Shoto Imanaga, and Aaron Nola. That rounds out our top 20. Let's start with not maybe the flashiest, but a former top pitching prospect in Gerrit Cole. And I feel like there's a lot of back and forth on valuations on where people are on Gerrit Cole because of some velo dips, some struggle. Obviously there was an injury. I think people forget that too. There was an injury at the beginning of the season that he was kind of re-ramping back up. But I don't remember the last time we saw Gerrit Cole without an injury or an injury tag attached to him where he was outside the top 10. He's coming in at 13 here. Is Gerrit Cole on your draftable list this season?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. In fact, I just started a build where I started with him as my ace. And that meant that I took a bunch of hitters. Yes, I didn't take one of the early aces, but I was happy with him as an ace. And part of the problem, or part of the reason I think that is that he had the exact same stuff plus in 2024 as he did in 2023. The reason why there was slightly fewer strikeouts was he went to the cutter more than his slider. I'm actually assuming that's somewhat health related and injury related, because why would he do that? I was
just about to ask you that.
Full course this season? And because he did trade some whiffs, but it was good for suppressing homers. And I just kind of feel like with time off, he'll come back to throwing the slider. Will Gerrit Cole stop throwing the slider at his age? No, he's not going to stop throwing the slider. He's going to come back. I think he's going to throw it more often. He'll get a little bit of those strikeouts back, and generally, I think it's a good sign that his stuff was just about where it was before, despite the injury. So I'm buying it, and he's been such a good guy for bulk, other than last year. I mean, really a 200 inning guy for a while.
Yeah, I was just about to. I was looking here. It's 200 the previous 2 years, which is kind of hard to find. And it will be interesting to see, because we saw, especially as age ticks on, some of these guys, you're going to see fastball usages go down. again, maybe due to injuries, he went from 53 down to 45 on the four-seam fastball usage last year. And then, as you mentioned, we were seeing that cutter that got thrown in. But, I don't think it would be shocking if a guy like Gerrit Cole also dipped down into the 40s on the fastball, and maybe that slider usage comes back up. But
the good news is those other things are still good.
Exactly.
This is good. This is why, like, if you're building a dynasty team or you're talking about keepers, you do want a guy with a good fastball from the beginning, because they can age so much better. Because as they're using their fastball less and less, as they lose velocity, they can use their other stuff. But Cole always came with like a huge arsenal of great pitches. The slider's great, the curve is great, the change is good, and he'll still be good, I think, even as he does it. This is what every old pitcher does, for sure.
Yeah, and if you want to look at whiff rates too, he had 30% whiff rate on the knuckle curve. Slider was at 26 and cutter was at 22%. Most of those right in line with that fastball. So fastball usage comes down, he can come back up. All right, so you're a buyer back into Gerrit Cole. I think that's a good positive sign. Now let's really test you. Jacob deGrom. Jacob deGrom at 16 on ECR. He's all over the board. I believe Yahoo has him as a 36th overall player. We've seen him in some instances go off as like the 5 or 6 in NFBC drafts. People making the case for him at number 1. The deal with Jacob deGrom is kind of always the same. And it's maybe you'll tell us different, but how do you stomach it? When he pitches from a per game basis, he's incredible. He's always incredible. I think if he got 100 innings this year, if you look at a per game basis, he is probably going to be top 3 of pitchers. But the problem is you got to kind of narrative base this on per game basis, because at the end of the day, him getting 150 innings is a pipe dream. And I think the team has even talked about hoping to just get like 110, maybe 120 out of him. So ECR's got him pushed low. I think he is one of the few pitchers with the biggest variance. You can see it also on the ECR as he has a high of 3 at SP and a low of 40 in rankers. So people are all over the board. What is your take on Jacob deGrom and the potential of health, his stuff, and how you would even potentially draft him?
Yeah, I had a really hard time with where I had him. I had him in my top 10, and I took him out of my top 10. Right now, I have him, sort of actually kind of close to the consensus around 15. And I have a little mini tier of oft-injured, high upside guys like Glasnow, Fried, and him right there. And then they're not too far up from Strider, Ohtani, and Sasaki, who I think are significant health risks. So, I kind of tiered my guys, and I hedged my bets, and, I can hem and haw, and I can talk all the way around it. But I can tell you this is more definitive. The shallower your league is, the more you should take Jake deGrom, I think. The shallower your league is, the reason is, and the more IL slots you have on your team, the better it is. So I'm a little biased away from deGrom. I don't have a share yet, except in my keepers. And the reason is I'm in a lot of 15-team leagues with no IL stints, no IL slots on the team. And so what do you do in those times when deGrom is like, oh, it's going to be maybe 2 weeks, 3, maybe it's going to be a month, maybe it's going to be 6. What do you do for 6 weeks with a bench slot? You only have like 6 or 7 bench slots, and one of them has to be deGrom. Like, it starts to gum up your team, and it makes it really hard. And then also, if you're in a 15-team league, you're going out in the wire trying to replace him with whatever's out there in a 15-team league. So
yeah.
Those are my concerns. But, if I'm in like a 10-team league and I get deGrom as like my second pitcher, yes. Like, I'll lean in. I'll do Skenes deGrom or do Crochet deGrom and just be like, whatever. Like, I'm going for it. I think that the shallower your league is, the more IL stints you have, the more you do something.
So it's funny, a couple things in there. So to your point, if you're in like a TGFBI base league, which uses NFBC, and then there's like 7 bench spots, no IL, I don't think so.
It's kind of hard.
Is this hard? Draft and hold is a little bit more interesting. I took him. I am currently drafting in our Tout draft and hold online, and I took him.
Well, because you might take 15 starting pitchers or something. Right?
I took him in the 5th round, and you know who my first pitcher was? Garrett Crochet. I took Garrett Crochet, and I have deGrom, and nice. I went heavy on strikeouts on that one as well. So in a 50-team draft and hold, it's a little bit different. And then to your point, you're echoing something I've said on here a couple times, that when I was on PitchCon, that Nick Pollock said the same thing. He said, I believe he had said in a 10-team, Jacob deGrom is a top 5 SP because, again, the player pool is a lot less. You can replenish with the pitchers and the hitters, and he moves up. Same thing, 12 team, maybe he's like right around the top 10. So to your point, in smaller formats, push up Jacob deGrom, and maybe people can use the public perception of his rank to their advantage. 15 teams and ILs, those are the places you're probably avoiding him.
Yeah, one last thing to say about it is Tyler Glasnow last year with the 3.45 ERA and 135 innings or so was a top 25 pitcher. What you're expecting out of deGrom is even lower than that in terms of ERA. You're probably expecting like a 2.9 or something. So, I think that even if you only get to 120, 130 innings, you can get a lot of value out of these players.
The only I don't want to extend it, but something I've been thinking about, and this is not a top 30 guy, but I wonder if there's something to Jacob deGrom being healthy at the start of the season and the valuation versus a guy like Spencer Strider, who I would say is probably, from a stuff perspective, on the same plane, but his questionable start of the season makes him go way down outside the top 30. Yet, if they came to the same innings, how far off do you think like Strider versus deGrom would be this season?
I think that's a really smart thing to say. I think you need to consider Strider. If you don't get deGrom, you're in a shallow league, go get Strider. Especially if you have IL slots, do it. The one difference that I like personally is I like seeing a guy on the mound before I take them. And because, you're just even seeing with Sandy Alcantara, like we just saw him on the mound, he touched 99. Everyone's like, okay, everything's fine. But you don't really know because Walker Buehler did not step on the mound after his second Tommy John, late in the season. It was like, oh, maybe he'll come back, and he didn't. And guess what happened? He didn't in April, and he didn't until late in May. And when he did, it wasn't good. So I prefer to see a guy step on the mound once, but with Strider's talent, I think you go.
And they'd said no, but maybe they'll put him back out there. And in a hitting perspective, by the way, to your point, look at Matt McClain. It's not the same thing, but Matt McClain, we're like, oh, he might be halfway through the year. He wasn't, and he never played, and we never got any of him. So getting the guys in.
We don't have exit, like a similar thing. Like what I want to see is like pitching velocities. Like 99 from Alcantara means okay. It's all
same
back,
thing with McClanahan. McClanahan went out, and I think he was throwing 97, 98 in that.
But if McClain doesn't come back, or if McClain comes back and then we finally get a exit velocity in spring, it's like 101. You're like, okay, what does that mean? You know, you didn't get enough, time to see what was going on with the shoulder.
Exactly. One more in this tier. This has been one Joe has really harped on. Pablo Lopez coming in at 18. I think this one has maybe just jumped up to people of kind of why. I don't think he took that next big step. I think maybe there's some buyer's remorse from last year. I'm not sure there was a pitcher that had more up hype. It was probably Reagans and him, to be honest with you. The guys that like, hey, their ADPs don't meet the values, but Pablo was going sometimes as a top 5 pitcher. He's pushed all the way down to 18. What's your take and your willing investment in Pablo Lopez this year?
I have him lower than that. I have him 25th. And again, it's there's the sort of variance here is, do you think I have Strider ahead of him? And I have Ohtani as a pitcher ahead of him. I have Roki Sasaki ahead of him. I have guys who are risky for innings ahead of him. So if you think those guys shouldn't be ahead of him just because you don't like the innings, then you can move Pablo Lopez up maybe behind Bryce Miller and Grayson Rodriguez and Hunter Brown, who have 17, 18, 19, right? So you could get Pablo Lopez into the back end of the top 20 that way. But I see Pablo Lopez a little bit more like Luis Castillo, Logan Webb, Aaron Nola. I see these guys as they are bulk, but they're not as exciting as bulk as the top guys. They're kind of like, we call it oatmeal on Rates and Barrels.
Okay, so Pablo Lopez officially an oatmeal pitcher.
He's getting closer and closer to oatmeal. I think it's like a 3.6 ERA, 170 innings. Not a standout strikeout rate.
Let me ask you though,
but like somebody I'd rather have is like 2 or 3.
So last year, just as one little push on him, what we saw from 2023 to 24 was he increased his fastball percentage year over year, and maybe he lowered his curveball percentage. Maybe there was health or trust issues, and maybe it's a correlation, but the more fastballs, we were talking like with Cole earlier, the more fastballs he threw ended up correlating to a lower K percentage as well. And he dropped 4% on his K percentage from essentially 29% in 2023 down to 25%. If we were to get that 2023 version again of Pablo Lopez, which some might speculate, maybe he tinkers, maybe there's curveballs back, maybe there's just more sweepers and it's less fastballs, and that leads to a higher K percentage, and we get to around 28% with low walks. Does that make him blow by his value? And I guess really what I'm getting at is like, that's a little bit of a duh. Like, yeah, he strikes out more, he's more valuable. But like, do you think it is not conceivable that he can get back to that 23 form?
No, I do, but I think even that 23 form, you're looking at a guy that. Let me see if I have this. I sometimes I have what they were worth in those years. Yes, so in 23 he was a top 20. He was the 20th best fantasy baseball pitcher.
And that was a 3.6 ERA and a 29% K percentage.
So I think that describes his upside, because I don't think we're going back to 2021 when he was in Miami and had a 28% strikeout rate and a 3.07 ERA. Because A, he's not in Miami anymore, and then B, he's in the last 3 years he's been like a 3.7, 3.8 guy. If you sum it all up, so I think he's a guy that could be really back end sort of. I think he could be like someone who could be the 20th or 21st again, but he's most likely to be where I put him, 25th, 26th, something like that.
Let's go to our final set of pitchers here. This is 21 through 30 on the big board. We've got Logan Webb at 21. 22 is Tyler Glasnow, Bryce Miller, Luis Castillo, a couple Mariners in there, Tanner Bybee, Max Fried at 26, Bailey Ober, Freddie Peralta, Grayson Rodriguez, and Spencer Schwellenbach. You kind of briefly talked about this guy, but in the same vein of a lot of these pitchers where we're not putting a ton of volume on them, Tyler Glasnow is I call him like, Walmart Jacob deGrom, because when he's out there, or Walgreens or Kmart or whatever version, it's just, he's light. He's Jacob deGrom light, because when he's out there, he puts up big numbers. He's just not out there enough. And then obviously this Dodger team is really great. Projections are not gonna, I have to look. I think it's like 130, maybe 140 max. So it's not a full complete season, but when he's out there, he's great. Talk to me about the valuation. I think you said, didn't you have him around that like Jacob deGrom area, which would make you quite a bit higher than ECR? And, maybe you've kind of already answered this too with some of these other guys, your willingness to take and want Tyler Glasnow.
Yeah, I mean, at that extreme level where they're really great, I will risk it. And the way that I've been putting it on Rates and Barrels is the YOLO yo-yo, where I want to pair a guy that I think will have innings. So if I could start with Corbin Burnes, I'd love to back him up with Glasnow or deGrom. I would feel like between the two of them, I got innings and I got upside. And with Glasnow, one number that is on Fangraphs that I don't think people give enough credit to. It's actually a pretty predictive number, 2.90 Sierra for Glasnow last year. And Sierra's skill interactive ERA, it's really predictive. It's just, Stuff Plus has to beat Sierra and K minus BB for it to be useful. And Sierra's, one of the better metrics out there. So he could have put up a 2.9 ERA last year in 130. If he had done that, he was already a top 25 pitcher last year on 134 innings with a 3.49 ERA because of his strikeout rate, 32% strikeout rate, tons of strikeouts. So if he had done the 2.90 instead, he would have snuck into the top 20 among pitchers last year. And so that's why I think he's likely to do that. Now, maybe I have him a little aggressive where I have, but you have to consider replacement level too. If you can get top 20 out of him, and then you also get to go shopping for somebody else while he's on the IL, it can be a bonus. So I like Glasnow. We'll see as I update these ranks. I'm means testing them in all my drafts, and if I find that I'm just not taking them at these levels, you could see them dropping a little bit more towards consensus. But This is where I'm
I'm
at.
with you, though. I am higher than consensus on Glasnow and the same thing. Let me ask you this. Let me push this. Because we're talking very positively about like the Jacob deGroms and the Tyler Glasnow and some of these guys that are not
And I said I was conservative early on. So.
not as conservative. You and me are in the same range.
But the top of the board, the very top of the board, my first pick, I want to be conservative. The second pick, that's the yo-yo.
Okay, so and that's kind of where I want to go with this. What is the scenario when we're looking at these top 30 where Jacob deGrom and Tyler Glasnow have now not become options? Because you have created, this is where I would do it. If I took Corbin Burnes or I took Paul Skenes, I'm going to take that YOLO guy. We're going to get all the mass innings. But what does it look like where you're like, ooh, this is a little scary? You didn't say Crochet didn't fall into that, so I'm trying to figure out, like, would it be Michael
Fried,
King? Okay, so Fried is your first pitcher.
Let's say if I took Crochet first, how do I go the other direction?
Yeah, it's like how do you take deGrom and deGrom and Glasnow off the board where you're not willing to YOLO with them? Who are the pitchers that you've drafted?
I think if I took Crochet, if I took Chris Sale to begin with, if I took Cole Reagans to some extent, although he's maybe somewhere in between, if like Blake Snell was one of my first pitchers, okay. I'd want more innings, and then if I did do that, I would switch over to Grayson Rodriguez in this tier. I think he's going to be good for innings this year. I think that Logan Webb is a really interesting guy to take because his ERA will be really low, and if I took Garrett Crochet and added Logan Webb, I feel like that's a really interesting pairing. I mean, that's going to probably have like a combined 3.2 ERA. You smush those strikeout rates together, and it's probably still like a 25-26% at least. And you're probably doing pretty well, and you got to take a bunch of hitters in between.
That's like taking and hitting. That's like taking Schwarber and Luis Ariz together, where it's like they fix each other's batting average and they fix the counting stats a bit, and that's like what. Yeah, and that's the problem. Like I probably wouldn't advocate for taking like Logan Webb and Brian Wu because then you're struggling down on strikeouts a little bit. But it's really interesting how there are some complementary pieces, and maybe that's how you can put some of these pitchers together. There are pitchers that do a bit of everything. There are pitchers that come with some caveats, whether it's injuries, whether it's innings cap, whether it's strikeouts, and how you pair all of those together makes it really fascinating. There's quite a few really fun pitchers in here. We're actually going to hit a couple in our very last section here in just a second where we are going to sleeper bust and a must-have of these. But one of my favorite pitchers this year is Spencer Schwellenbach. I want to try to get him pretty much in every league I can because you can end up getting him at best it's an SP3 if you push back a little bit. In some formats, you might get in a 4 and a 5. We've talked a lot about like 10 and 12 teams, but I really love Schwellenbach. Had 123 innings last year, under a 3.5 ERA, low walks, a strikeout percentage that I think can still keep moving. I mean, his curveball and split finger, which combined for almost 27% usage, both were 40+% whiff pitches. And I think we could go to that even more. That is paired with maybe not a dominant fastball. I want to say Nick could push back on me about how good the fastball is, but it's a high velo fastball that can set up. So I'm in. I like the stuff of Spencer Schwellenbach, but you tell me, Spencer Schwellenbach, trying to say his name accurately, comes in at SP30. So he's the final guy on this list. What do you think about Schwellenbach?
I really like him. One of the things I found, you look at something like Stuff Plus, you say 105 Stuff Plus. Okay, what does that mean? Well, 100 is average, so he's comfortably above average. And you look at all the pitches, and you're like, well, the fastball 102, the cutter 100, the curve 101, and you're like, are any of these elite pitches? Well, the splitter is pretty good. Like you mentioned, the slider is pretty good. They're all good.
They're all good.
So he has like 5 really good pitches. I haven't even done the sinkers, at least average. So he has 6 really good pitches and command. And one thing that we've seen with some research that's come out recently, Baseball Prospectus has done this, Driveline has done this. If you look at the number of pitches that you have, that it's almost like the number, the sort of space you can cover. Like, do you have a big fastball and a big curveball? Like the kind of space that a hitter has to cover, the velocity a hitter has to cover. Do you have something that's 90 and something that's 70? If you start having something that's 90, have something that's 70, having something that's up here, something down here, it just becomes really hard for hitters to prepare for you and to hit you and to lock you in on something. You'll see guys that have like one dominant offering and they struggle sometimes. I think the opposite of Spencer Schwellenbach might be Dylan Cease, where he does not have command and he's kind of a 2-pitch guy, and it can work out well, but we've all seen Dylan Cease when he's at his worst. It's almost like Dylan Cease might be a best ball guy, where it's like you want him at his best and you don't want him at his worst, you know. Whereas Schwellenbach is gonna be really, like, I think, solid all the way through, and I think there might be some that research by Baseball Prospectus about their Arsenal metrics and Driveline has suggested that we sometimes underproject guys that have this ability. It's Seth Lugo last year. It's Yu Darvish at his best. You know, just a bunch of pitches keeping the hitter off balance. The projections for Schwellenbach are kind of mediocre, 3.65, 3.70 ERA. But if they're off just a little bit and it's more like a 3.5 or a 3.4, he kind of repeats what he did last year. I mean, he was last year, he was the, let's see here. I've got him as the, what's that, 46? Because he only had 123 innings. So, you know, if he does that same thing over again with 170 innings, I mean, I think this is somebody that could easily jump into the top 15. And he may just stay there because he would have some things in common with like a George Kirby, right? Elite command with a great big arsenal. And, you know, I think he's great.
It's funny you say that because, like, I've likened Schwellenbach to, like, everything you like about Brian Wu, but now take more strikeouts. And there are more pitches to go back on. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, if you were to run the second half of the season, his first 44 innings, they were okay. They were fine. It was, not great. 4.4 ERA, had a 1.16 whip. You know, decent numbers. He only walked 10 in those 40 by striking out 41. But in the second half, 79, the last 79 innings of the season, he had a 2.73 ERA, walked only 13 in those final 79 innings while striking more than per inning pitched. So I think there's just like, I don't use this saying a lot. Bogman uses it, but there's a lot of meat on the bone. I think the baseline is that 30 range. I feel pretty safe about getting in that 30. But I think the top end could be inside the top 20, especially if he does progress.
Some of the upside, I think, you're like, well, this sounds like a really polished guy. He's got a bunch of pitches. He got a command. Where's the upside? You know, where is the elite pitch? What's the new thing? What could he come to camp and talk about? You know, I would say it's the splitter because I talked to him about it. And one of the things that makes Schwellenbach good is that he throws from almost like a Michael Givens slot. Like he's kind of out here like a shortstop. He's a former shortstop. He throws from like a shortstop-y slot, but he gets ride on his fastball. So it's a deceptive fastball. He has really good feel of the curve and the slider, and he throws his fastball with a little bit of cut on purpose. So he says that he spends his bullpen, and the Braves only spend 12 pitches per bullpen. You know, they throw 12 to 14 pitches per bullpen. That's it. So he spends his bullpen just throwing like a couple fastballs and then all breaking balls to keep them separate because this is the cut fastball. This is the, you know what I mean? He has to do all of them separate. And he says he never throws the splitter in the bullpen. What I hear from that is, over time, he's just going to get better at the splitter because he has to throw out in games. He has to go out and actually compete in a game and throw the splitter. And the more he does that, the more he'll have feel for it.
Yeah, and we've seen splitters unlock a lot for a lot of different players this past season. I mean, obviously, Hunter Green, it wasn't even necessarily to a strikeout ratio, but it helped his ERA. And it's a low ERA guy. I like Spencer Schwellenbach, and that is why it takes us to the final territory. Can you really have a sleeper in the top 30? Maybe not necessarily, but
yeah,
for
that's where it gets tough.
But for the funsies of it, since we do this on the pitching guides, we're going to pick a sleeper. We're going to pick a bust in the top 30 and a guy that you must have. I do want you to go first, but since we just did it, I'm just going to get it over with because when we talk about the sleeper, that is my sleeper. It is Spencer Schwellenbach. So we just kind of gave a good conversation around him. He is 30. I think there is more upside. I do think there's some interesting names in here. The way we would use sleeper, obviously, would just be a guy that has a decent chance to up their value based on where they're being drafted, that their production could get them quite a bit higher. And I think this range has quite a few of those names. Spencer Schwellenbach, Tyler Glasnow, Logan Webb, even though he's kind of being drafted at 21, as mentioned, quite a few players that fall into that. But Spencer Schwellenbach would be my sleeper of the top 30. Eno, who is your sleeper? Because I know you've mentioned him once before, and this is an opportunity to break down this guy a little bit.
Grayson Rodriguez is my guy. I think he's just about ready to bust into the stratosphere. What I like about him is he's already done something good. Like, we're not asking him to come from nothing and do something he's never done before. He's been good for stretches. Another thing that he's shown us is his changeup is really good and his fastball is really good. So that's a good foundation for getting lefties out. And lo and behold, you look, he's got some reverse split action. Like in terms of his platoon splits, he's had a little bit of a harder time getting righties out. And so you're like, well, man, the slider looks okay. He's got a curveball. Hey, he's coming to camp with a sweeper. So between those three breaking balls, I think he's going to find what it takes to get righties out at the same clip that he gets lefties out with that amazing changeup. It's a really good fastball, which I said when we were talking about Gerrit Cole. Starting with a really good fastball is going to change everything about what you do in the future and how you age. So I just love this. We've got a guy who I think is going to get past that injury last year. He did enough innings last year where he can throw 150, 160, 170 innings this year. They won't bat an eyelash. They need him also from a team perspective. They need him to kind of become the ace. This is what they did. They didn't get an ace.
They lost Burnes and they brought in Eflin. That was it, right?
Yeah. And you can like Sugano, but he's not an ace. He throws like 91. So, and Eflin throws 91. So who's the guy who throws hard and has a bunch of pitches and who can be dominant on the mound and was one of the best pitching prospects of his time? It's Grayson Rodriguez. And I think this is the year he puts it together.
They need a dog, and Grayson's that dog, man, for sure. All right, we're busting a top 30 pitcher. So who are you going to put as a bust in the top 30?
This one was really easy for me. Bailey Ober does not have a pitch that is over 100 stuff plus. He has, I think, poor stuff. How does he get these strikeout rates then? He throws his fastball high in the zone with great command, and he does have a pretty good changeup. But that fastball is 90 poo. It's not 95. It's not 96. It's like barely. It's like 91. Like league average fastball, I don't know if people notice it. It used to be 89, 90 when we started tracking it. Last year it's over 94. And even for starters now, it's 93.
When was that start? When did you start tracking? When was the start tracking, you mean?
2007.
So we've moved, 4.5 to 5 miles per hour in, if I can do math, 18 years?
And don't believe anybody who tells you that it's because the technology has changed. The technology has not changed. Where we track the ball has not changed. Everything's been the same since 2007, 2008, and we've gone from 89.9 to 94.1.
Okay. My pitcher in there, I'm kind of...
So I did wait.
Yeah,
for Ober, that means homers. For Ober, that means homers. And we've seen it. He's got a lot of homers. Even if he can keep the whip down low, it's going to be a 3.9 ERA. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating, too, to have all those Twins guys in there. He's the kind of least I have interest in because he gets the most buzz. You get Pablo, you get Joe Ryan, you get Ober. Ober's really getting pushed up, and, I mean, he made this list. He was number 27.
I cannot believe he's above Joe Ryan. Because you didn't say Joe Ryan's name,
I did not say Joe Ryan. Joe Ryan did not make this top 30. He's going ahead of Joe Ryan.
No, I like Joe Ryan much better than Bailey. Much better.
He has the the second highest variance if you're looking at highs and lows of where they're ranked versus the lowest. The lowest is actually Schwellenbach, who the lowest rank someone has him at 46 SP, but they have him at 15. Ober has a high of 20, but a low of 42. So there's also some variance in it.
Let me see. I don't think I'm necessarily in those. So let me just see where I've got Ober real quick.
I'm waiting to hear 52. Say
50.
Oh, I was joking. Oh, you destroyed him. All right. Well, we got exactly what the comment section is going to be. It'll be the Bailey Ober truthers. I love that one. Oh, man. All right. My bust in this range is going to be Max Fried. I don't have a ton of interest in Max Fried, even though I will say, 170-plus innings 2 of the last 3 years. He did have a 3.25 ERA, but we had a declining strikeout rate. Walks were the fourth highest of his career, but more importantly, the highest over the last 4 years. Expected ERA closer to around 3.7, giving up some more barrels, giving up some more contact, and now he's going into this hitter-friendly environment in a really tough division. He's getting pushed up in ranks. I'm just not overtly excited, and I don't think he's going to crack the top top 30. Though the thing is I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in and he has a nice little stretch where he pushes off, a really big month. But I'm worried he's going to get banged up a little bit. The walks definitely have me concerned with the lower strikeout rate. If you're going to give me higher walks, you need to give me higher strikeouts. I can't have both working in that opposite direction. Half a run expected ERA difference. Max Fried is my bust. You'd kind of mentioned him. Did you have just quick anecdotal anything on Max Fried push back on me on?
No, I tend to agree with you. I think I have him a little lower than most people. And, another thing that, that went up with the strikeout rate went up with the velo over time. And so, the league average strikeout rate this last year was 22.6%, and Max Fried's at 23%. So that's actually a league average strikeout rate. You have to kind of redo that in your mind. If you've been watching baseball or think about baseball for a while, you would never look at him and say, oh, that's average.
Yeah.
But,
and if that walk
average strikeout
and if that walk rate maintains too, that's worse than league average.
And yeah, and also if you think about fantasy, like we're not actually concerned with like a large part of the pitching population.
Yeah.
Like the bottom 25%, like we don't
good point.
want them
So
on our
get the
rosters.
Percentage of like the startable fantasy assets, and it's probably that's 20.
It's higher.
Yeah, that's probably like 24.5% or something or close to there. Final one. This is the last bad boy that we're going to talk about. And guess what? This is the pitcher in the top 30 that we said you must have. And all of the top 30 was on the table. And guess what? Eno and I picked the same guy. So, Eno, I will let you do the honors. Who is the pitcher we both say you must have?
Oh, he's got one of the best fastballs in the league, and he's developing into a 4 or 5 pitch mix guy, and he's projected to have a 32% strikeout rate and a 2.8 ERA, and his name is Garrett Crochet.
We talked a lot about him. We're drafting him. I have a lot of shares on him. I love the strikeout potential. Don't be shocked when he leads the league. There's a little betting pros anecdotal for you. And really, at the end of the day, we're going to just have to see what the ballpark does. But there's a lot of offensive support there. Love Bregman being there. We both say the pitcher, even though he is inside the top 10, I think we both have him as a top 5. We say Garrett Crochet is your must-have pitcher. And ladies and gentlemen, those are the top 30 of the guide, the starting pitcher guide, the must-haves. Who are you drafting? Who should you avoid? We got you covered. Now, we only covered 30. So where are the others? Well, guess what? Coming up on the next episode, his podcast mate, Mr. Nick Pollock, is going to be grilled by Joe Pisapia for part 2. And then it's going to culminate to Joe Arrico putting Eno Sarris and Nick Pollock to the test in ADP battles. So we signed you guys up for a week of
It's like we
pitchers.
planned it, but we didn't.
It's like we were really, really slick and we had a great idea, but not quite. But, I love you, brother. Thank you so much for hanging out. Everybody's got to go check out all the great stuff. Rates and Barrels, I believe, is going to 5 days a week. You guys are ticking back up. I know you were working on an article right before this was coming up. Any pitching-related things to plug to anybody? I know you were reworking stuff.
Yeah, tomorrow I've got 3 pitches that I think could mean a lot to breakouts. 3 pitchers that could use these pitches to break out. And it's part of a collaboration between Eric Samolsky and Lance Browzdowski and Nick Pollock and I. So you're going to see a very similar piece on all of our sites, and we're going to link to each other so you can kind of peruse all the most important pitches that you should be watching this spring.
Incredible. I'm going to lock them. Those are my favorite people. You're just putting together all my favorite people. You are one of my favorite. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, and thank you for all hanging out with us. Who's your favorite pitcher, your sleeper, your must-have? Who did you hate on this list? Are you going to yell at Eno about Bailey Ober? We'll do it in the comments. Don't do it anywhere else. You can do it in the comments. Drop them below. And guess what? That might even win you that Billy Wagner signed autograph ball. So get on it right now. For Eno Sarris, I am Chris Welsh. Thank you so much for hanging out with us on the Ultimate Pitching Guide Part 1. We'll talk to you next time right here on Fantasy Pros.